Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Porosoff. I was an educator in independent schools for 18 years, and now my work is on empowering students and teachers to bring their values to their learning, work, and relationships. Today, I'm going to be talking about helping students seek help. Maybe even before students transitioned into online learning, you notice that sometimes they didn't always ask for the help that would benefit them, even though getting help is such a critical aspect of learning and achieving. But at least when students are in school with us, we can look for clues that they're struggling. And some students are really good at covering up the fact that they need help, but we might still notice. When students are online, which we can expect that there's at least a possibility that they'll continue to be online for at least part of the upcoming year, it's a lot harder to notice when they need help. So today we're going to be learning some tools and strategies to help students seek help, whether that's in person or online. So let's get started. We're going to begin with some assumptions. First, help is critical to learning and achievement. If you ever read about or watch a biopic about someone who's very accomplished, we just watched the one about Michael Jordan that recently came out, you'll discover that that person, the top performer in their field, is someone who got a lot of help. So Michael Jordan, not to take anything away from his personal accomplishments and talents, but he got a lot of help. He had family members and friends, he had coaches and teammates who all helped him become a better player. So help is actually critical. And on a related note, it's a sign of strength, not weakness. It's a sign that someone really takes their learning and achievement seriously. Related to that, creating conditions that encourage help seeking is necessary for equity. It's important that all students are able to seek the help that they need in order to achieve and learn. And on that point, help seeking is a learnable skill. Some students might be more inclined to seek help, but all of them can learn how. And then finally, as teachers, we have a responsibility to teach all students why, when, and how to seek help. So whether you're a lower school, middle school, upper school, no matter what subjects we teach, it's up to us to make sure all of our students have the capacity to seek the help that would benefit them so that they can learn and achieve. So with those assumptions in mind, let's get started on our work today. I'm going to ask you to reflect on what stops students at your school from seeking the help that would benefit them. You might want to pause the video and write for a little while, or talk to someone, or just take a few moments to think about what some of the barriers might be, what stops students from asking for help. Now, when I ask this question of students, and I do ask them what stops students at our school from seeking help, not what stops you from seeking help, because that would just seem kind of accusatory. When I ask them this question, here are some of the things that they identified as barriers to seeking help. So one person said, sometimes I don't even know what my question is, or I can't formulate it into words. So here's someone who would benefit from seeking help, but isn't sure what kinds of help they need or how to ask for it. Another person said, I never ask questions because I never learned in the first place. So this person is kind of assuming that the only time to ask for help is when you're confused about something, but if you're not learning anything, then that's not a time to ask for help. But I would say that if a student feels like they're not learning, that's a perfect time to be asking for help. And then on the flip side, I know basically everything and it's too easy. So again, this student is assuming that the only time to ask for help is when something is hard or you're struggling to understand something, when actually, if you're not learning, if the material is too easy, then those are great times to ask for help. Those are their own kinds of struggles. And then finally, I don't go to teachers for help anymore because I forget it's an option 90% of the time. It's like, oh, that's a thing? I forgot. So here's a student who, this student isn't getting the cues to remember that help seeking is an option. So all of these are knowledge barriers. They're all times when students are not aware of the fact that they could be asking for help. There are people that they could be going to for help. That some of these students mentioned going to teachers, but teachers are not the only people that students might seek help from. So they're not aware of what it feels like to need help, the kinds of things that they can get help with, and who they can go to for help. So the way around knowledge barriers is for us as teachers to raise students' awareness of what needing help looks and feels like, what types of help will benefit them most, and who can provide the help that will benefit them. And I'm going to show you some activities to help raise students' awareness of these things. But before I get to those, there's another kind of barrier to seeking help that's really important. And those are emotional barriers. And I'll give you some examples of things students said. One person said, I think sometimes maybe people are a little embarrassed. So this student sort of said this very hesitantly, but probably named one of the top reasons that students avoid seeking help. They feel embarrassed, especially if they're asking in front of their peers. And actually, there's a line of research that says that students who are more status conscious, those who are thinking about their academic status, meaning getting good grades, or their social status, meaning having lots of friends and being popular, those are the students who are actually less likely to ask for help. And that's probably because they feel embarrassed. They feel like if they ask for help, it's going to make them seem like they're stupid or ignorant or in some way less than. And so they don't ask for help. Another student said, I'm afraid the teacher will think I wasn't listening and maybe even give me a lower grade. So here's someone else who's really status conscious and also is kind of afraid to talk to their teacher. So it might be that this student needs to develop a closer relationship with their teacher, or more accurately, that their teacher needs to take some responsibility to develop a closer relationship with them. But that fear that sometimes students experience can be a real barrier to asking for help. And sometimes if they overcome that barrier and ask for help, they develop a closer relationship in the process. And then finally, sometimes they, meaning the people trying to help, confuse me more, or they don't help to successfully answer the question. I've definitely had that experience of being frustrated when I ask for a particular type of help and that's not the type of help I get. Like sometimes I'll ask someone for help by reading a chapter of one of my books in progress, and I'll ask them to tell me about times when they feel confused or when they want more detail, and they'll come back to me having corrected some of my comma mistakes, which is great, but that's not the kind of help that I was asking for. Now, I've asked for help enough times that I've had great experiences asking for help, and a few experiences where I don't get the kinds of help that I want aren't going to stop me from asking for more help in the future. But for students, that frustration can serve as another type of barrier. So how do we get around emotional barriers? We help students develop the willingness to experience those emotions in the service of something important. So why should I ask for help, even when it feels uncomfortable? Now, of course, it's great to feel comfortable, but sometimes asking for help is going to make us feel awkward. I remember one time when my daughter was an infant. The first time I took her out, I was so excited to take her to a local diner to have lunch. She didn't eat the diner food, she was too little, but I was going to take my daughter out to lunch. And I got to the parking lot and I went to remove her little carrier from the snap-in car seat, and I wasn't able to do it. And I became so frustrated that I actually started crying right there in the parking lot. And luckily for me, a woman walked by with with her two kids. She had two small children that were with her, but significantly older than my daughter. And I thought, okay, maybe this is someone who knows how to do this and can help me. And even though I felt awkward, I definitely felt uncomfortable reaching out to a stranger in a parking lot when I was in tears, but she came over and she helped me. And it was worth asking for that help because it was important to me to have lunch with my daughter. So if the goal is important enough to us, then we're willing to feel a little bit uncomfortable when we ask for help. Then how can I ask for help in ways that respect the other person's needs as well as my own? So if students feel a little bit afraid to ask for help, then learning ways to ask for help respectfully of the other person and of themselves can help them get past a little of that fear. And then finally, why should I keep asking for help even if I don't always get the outcome I want? We can get them to keep asking for the help that they need so that they can learn and grow. So let's look at some of the activities that can help students cultivate awareness, and then later we'll get back to willingness. So first, what does needing help look and feel like? In order to help students discover what needing help looks and feels like, you can write case studies based on struggles your students often encounter. Now, I'm going to give you some examples in a moment, but it's actually better if you write your own examples based on the kinds of struggles you see. So if you see lots of students who are having trouble paying attention or solving a particular type of problem or reading a particular book, then you might write a case study based on that students can relate to. And that helps them see that their struggles are the same kinds of struggles that other students have, and that they're actually not a sign of weakness. And then after reading about other students like themselves, you can lead a discussion on the goals the student seems to have, the kinds of help that would benefit this student, and some possible sources of help. So that instead of tying help seeking to weakness, they begin to tie help seeking to goals. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Here's one. This one is based on when I used to teach English. Ryder feels he's trying his hardest in English class. He reads carefully, takes thorough notes, and contributes to every discussion. His grades are usually in the B+ A- range, and he very much wants to get an A. When working on writing assignments, Ryder often asks, "Is it okay if?" questions, such as, "Is it okay if all my quotations are in the second paragraph?" Or, "Is it okay if my essay is in an 11-point font?" After his essays are graded, the comments always say that his thesis is too vague and he needs to support his points with more evidence. Ryder always feels that he does have a specific thesis and does use enough evidence. He's just been assigned another essay, which is due in 2 weeks. So after reading a case study like this, students could talk about Ryder's goals and the kinds of help that might benefit him and who some possible sources of help might be. He's not a weak student, but he's doing some things that are not serving him, and he wants some things that he needs some strategies to be able to do. Here's another example related to online learning. Sandra loves the online discussions in her science and math classes, but in English, she never feels like she has anything to add. She ends up making jokes in the chat box, or she just turns off her camera. Sandra's teacher has emailed her to ask her to please try to participate and stop distracting her classmates. Sandra is afraid that if she tells her teacher that she just doesn't know what to say in discussions, the teacher will think she's being even more disrespectful and get angry. So again, this is not a weak student, but it is a student who has a particular struggle and a particular set of goals that she could get help with. So by reading and discussing case studies like these, students begin to notice what it looks and feels like to need help and might be more inclined to ask for the help that they need. Another activity to do with students involves cultivating their awareness of the kinds of help that will benefit them most, because sometimes they ask for help that isn't actually that helpful to them in the long run. And I'll give you an example that I saw a lot when I taught English. When students had to edit their essays or stories or plays, they sometimes would ask for help by asking for a new strategy to help them edit. And sometimes they would ask for help by asking an adult to edit their work for them. Now, obviously, asking someone else to edit their essay is going to be more comfortable in the short term. It's going to be a huge relief. Now there's less work that they have to do. But it might hurt them in the long term. They might begin to feel dependent on other people. They might feel like they can't edit for themselves. Asking for an editing strategy might be a little bit more work in the short term, so they might not feel like doing it. But if they do, then they might learn something that actually benefits them in the long term. So to help students distinguish these two kinds of help, I recommend having them do a help classification activity. So give them lots of different examples of different kinds of help, some that feel good in the short term and some that are actually really beneficial in the long term. Ask them to imagine a future version of themselves, and then ask them, which kinds of help would that future you be glad you asked for, even if it felt uncomfortable at the time or required extra effort? And then which kinds of help might future you regret getting, even if it gave you some relief at the time? And then which could go either way. So they could do this on cards and do a card sort. They could just make 3 lists. And then you can have a discussion about different kinds of help that maybe feel good in the short term but don't benefit them, and kinds of help that maybe are a little uncomfortable or effortful in the short term but benefit them in the long term. I like to follow up this exercise by giving students a handout, and that little icon in the upper left corner means that this is going to be a handout that's part of the packet that will be available to you. So I like to share with students 5 types of what I call helpful help. So first, knowledge, things that they might need or want to know. Exemplars or examples of excellence they can look at. Often when we're trying to do something, it really helps to look at other examples of the type of work we're trying to create. Strategies, like an editing strategy to do something that they need to do. Extra practice so that they get better at a particular skill. And then feedback, whether that's suggestions for improvement or just saying back what you notice or asking questions, anything that helps them move their work to the next stage. So these are some types of helpful help. And again, once students are aware of these types of help, they might be more inclined to ask for them. And then finally, as far as cultivating awareness, who can provide the help that will benefit students? Sometimes they feel like the only people they can ask for help are their teachers or an adult they live with. Sometimes they have a tutor, but actually their help network might be a lot larger than that. So what I do for this is I ask students in the middle of this graphic organizer to write team, whatever their name is. So I would write Team Lauren. And I give them the 5 types of helpful help: knowledge, exemplars, strategies, practice, and feedback. And then I add sustenance, because sometimes all students need is just, someone to make them a snack, or someone who's just there to listen to them or be in the room with them. So physical sustenance or emotional sustenance, that's a type of help as well. And maybe we don't consider that academic help, but it is an important type of help for some students. So just give them a graphic organizer or have them draw one for themselves. And then ask them to brainstorm first who has helped them in the past. Sometimes the people who have helped us before are going to be the very people we call upon to help us again. But just so that they're not limited by the past, you can also ask them who could help you in the future, so that they continue to make these lists of different people that they might turn to for different kinds of help. Sometimes students are well aware of the fact that they need help. They know what kinds of help they can ask for. They know who's in their help network. And the problem isn't a knowledge barrier, it's an emotional barrier. So now I'm going to share some ways to cultivate students' willingness to ask for help. So first, why would I ask for help even when it feels uncomfortable? What makes it worthwhile? And in order to do that, what I share with students is that there are 2 kinds of academic goals. Now, if you read the help-seeking literature, These two kinds of goals you'll see are called performance goals and mastery goals in the literature. But those terms I find are not particularly relatable for students, and frankly, not always for teachers either. So I call them getting and maintaining goals and learning and improving goals. Getting and maintaining goals are things like, I want to get an A, I want to maintain my average, I want to have lots of friends, I want to have the respect of my teacher. And what I say to students is, getting and maintaining goals are actually not very interesting because we kind of all have the same ones. Like sometimes with my students, I ask them, okay, imagine that you can get any grade on this assignment, an A, A minus, B plus, B, I go through them all. Now think in your mind, don't say it out loud, which grade would you like the best? And I'm gonna count to 3 and then we're all gonna say it at the same time. 1, 2, 3, and then they all say A, because of course they all wanna get an A. If there's an opportunity to do well, most people wanna do well. Most people wanna be well liked. So even though these things might be important to some of us, maybe all of us, it's not particularly interesting to dwell on it. So I very quickly turn them away from focusing on performance goals and have them think about their learning and improving goals. Learning and improving goals are much more reflective of who we are as individuals, what our backgrounds and experiences and identities have brought to us. So I want to know more about Toni Morrison. I want to be able to write poetry. I want to get better at writing poetry or editing my essays. So after my students learn this distinction, I have them list some of their learning and improving goals in my class. Then I have them mark one goal that feels particularly important so that they have something to really focus on that's meaningful to them. Then I have them list ways they could move towards that goal using the 5 types of helpful help list as a reference. And then finally, who are some specific people who could give you the kinds of help that you listed, referring back to their help network brainstorm. And this way, they've tied help seeking to a goal that's really important to them. Sometimes, though, they don't necessarily have learning and improving goals in my class. And I get it. They get plunked into English. They didn't get to pick being in this class. And they might really struggle to identify authentic learning and improving goals. So what sometimes helps for those students is some values clarification work. I ask them, when you think about how you want to live your life, how you want to learn, work, treat others, and treat yourself, what words come to mind? Now, sometimes it's really hard for students to have words come to mind because they're not used to being asked this question. So sometimes I'll give them a list of different qualities of action, values that they want to live by in how they learn or work, and so on. And I have them think a little bit about the ones that are most important to them. And once they've identified a few values, I ask them, how can you do this assignment that you're currently working on in those ways? So how can you write these poems creatively? How can you study for your science test creatively? How can you do your math problems curiously or compassionately? And then who are some specific people that could help you bring those qualities to this assignment, again, referring back to their help network brainstorm. So these are some ways to help students associate the work that they're doing in your class with goals or values that are important to them. And once they start to do that, they might feel a little bit more willing to ask for help, even if it's uncomfortable, because it's in the service of something that matters to them. Another thing to help students cultivate willingness is to help them learn how to ask for help in ways that respect the other person's needs as well as their own. So let's look at how to do that. What I do with students is I show them help-seeking emails that I've authentically sent. So one example that I showed students, and it's really low stakes, is I was throwing a 40th birthday party for my husband. This was a while ago. And I emailed one of his friends to ask for the email address of another one of his friends that he didn't have contact info for. So I showed my students this email and I asked them, first of all, what do you notice? And they noticed that it was a pretty short email, that I was polite, that I was really specific in my request, that I was a little bit formal because this wasn't someone I knew, but I wasn't very formal because it was just a friend of my husband's that I was asking about someone else's email address. So those were some of the things that they noticed. Then I asked, how do you think I felt when I sent it? And they said, yeah, you probably felt a little weird about it. Why do you think I sent it anyway? Well, because it was important to you to get this other guy's email address so that you could invite him to your husband's party. So then we repeated this process for more emails. And each time I raised the stakes a little bit. So the next one I showed them was asking a colleague to cover my class when I had to go to the doctor's office. And this one, I knew the person better, but it was kind of a bigger ask. So there was more at stake. And then the last one I showed them was when I emailed a superintendent of schools that I had never met before and asked him if he would be willing to read one of my books and maybe write a blurb about it. So this one was a lot more formal, it had a lot more context, and it was because it wasn't someone I knew and it was a much bigger ask than either of the first two. And then I asked them, after we'd had these different discussions, what thoughts and feelings might you have when you're sending a help-seeking email? Can you have these thoughts and feelings and still send the email? Yes. And why would you want to? Why would you be willing to have those feelings and send the email anyway? So we follow up this discussion with some low stakes practice. They immediately write their own emails asking someone for help that would benefit them. And we go back and do something that's really small and simple so that they get some practice writing help-seeking emails. And then we return to this practice so that they can raise the stakes a little bit more and a little bit more and become a little bit more able to ask for the kinds of help that they need. I also fill out a rubric where I don't grade them, but I give them some feedback about how well they were able to seek help. So did they give the necessary context to the person? Did they give a request that was really specific? Was their tone appropriate to the relationship they have with the person? Did they express appreciation? And then did they carefully proofread as a sign of respect? And what starts to happen is they get better and better at doing all of these things that are respectful of the other person's needs and also of their own. They're asking for the help that is specific to the situation that they're in. They're asking for help that relates directly to the goals that they have. And so over time, even if they still feel a little bit awkward, it lowers that fear a little bit because they know that they're asking for help effectively and respectfully. And then finally, how do we cultivate students' willingness to keep asking for help, even if they don't always get the outcomes they want? So maybe the person said no, they wouldn't help them, they didn't have time, or they asked for a particular kind of help and they got a different kind of help. How do we help students continue to be willing to ask for help? So we can boost the good feelings associated with doing something important through reflection. So first, what was important to you that made asking for help worthwhile? And how do you feel about yourself as a result of asking for help with something important? So even if they didn't get the results they want, they might feel really good about their courage, about how respectful they were, about how grateful they were. There might be all kinds of ways they live their values just in the process of asking for help, even if they don't get the outcomes they want. Second, if the person didn't help you, who else could you ask? So that helps them develop some flexibility if they don't get the outcomes that they want. And then if the person did help you, how could you show gratitude? Because showing gratitude might, again, boost their good feelings about asking for help. Next, if the type of help wasn't actually helpful, What type could you ask for next time? So again, developing their flexibility around asking for help, different kinds of help, different people. And then if it was helpful, what are some other situations when you could ask for that type of help? So they begin to expand their awareness that they can ask for that type of help and their willingness to ask for it in other situations. And then finally, imagine a future version of yourself. So again, not the perspective of their present moment self that might be uncomfortable, they might feel awkward or embarrassed or afraid, but their future self that they want to become. Why will this future self be glad you're learning how to ask for help? So even again, if they don't get the outcomes they want, why are they going to be glad that they did this work? So here's a final challenge I'm going to give you. Identify just one activity from this presentation that you're willing to try, describe it to one of your colleagues, and then ask them for help. So ask them to give you some feedback on whether they think it'll work in your classroom, or ask them to be a partner with you where maybe they do it too. Because as you teach students to ask for help, one of the best ways that you can relate to them, that you can give them examples, is to ask for help yourself. So I hope this presentation has been helpful to you. Here's my email address so that you can ask me for help or just stay in touch with me about how these activities are going. The help-seeking exercises that I shared with you today come from my book, Empower Your Students. Both that and 2-for-1 Teaching are about helping students bring their values to their learning, work, and relationships. I hope that today has been helpful to you. Thank you.